Hi everyone, this is Dr Raquel Butler from Integrated Veterinary Therapeutics.
And Sophie Vandenberg from Equine Posture. And we welcome you to the Equine Functional Posture podcast, your ultimate source for insights into the influence of functional posture on biomechanics, health, and overall well-being of horses.
Whether you're a seasoned equestrian, an equine professional, or simply a horse enthusiast, this podcast is designed to help you understand the critical aspects of functional posture.
Tune in each week as we discuss practical tips, delve into expert interviews, and explore the latest research in the impact of functional posture on equine anatomy, physiology, movement, and more.
Let's create a world where we empower our horses to be in a mental, emotional, and physical balance. Yay, we're in episode 3. We're going to be discussing proprioception. Are you excited about this podcast, Sophie?
Very, such an important topic.
It is. It's so important for every horse owner to have a bit of an understanding of, because it can really make a massive difference to your horse's performance, your safety, and there's so many aspects to it. So yeah, let's just jump in. So when you think about proprioception, what does it mean to you?
So it's your ability to be aware of your body, its position in space, and your movement relative to yourself and the things around you, and also your inference of the forces you come in contact with, being the ground or the things you touch, etc. So it's really where you are in space.
Yeah, and really having a subconscious awareness of that. Like, it's not something that you should have to be consciously aware of. So, like, I'll give an example of my own body and how I recognize proprioception, because I would say I used to have exceptional proprioception. So I could, walk outside in the dark. I could feel the ground. If the ground changed, it was not a problem. I was able to adapt myself. I never tripped. I never stumbled. I had very good balance riding my horse, and I could have, closed my eyes and walked outside in the dark and maintained my movement, my position, and everything. Then when I did had my disc bulge last year, all of a sudden I was tripping over my own foot. A little raise in the grass I would trip over. I lost awareness of that foot. I lost awareness of, like where it was in space, and where it was moving through space, and also how to move it through space. So my whole perception of my body was altered, and it was scary. Like going from somebody who was so balanced, really didn't have to worry about my body, to now thinking, oh, I could trip and nothing could be there, and I can't walk fast anymore because I might not pick up my leg quick enough to clear the slight change in the terrain. And so through that whole process, I really thought about, gosh, what is it like for horses when, they're lacking proprioception? Because as we've mentioned in other episodes, the safety aspect for them to have control of their body, know how their body's going to respond, is so vital. So, like, yeah, it really gave me a new appreciation of horses' proprioception, and how they must feel so out of control and unsafe when they can't predict something like, I'm going to stumble or trip. So, yeah, why is this so important to horses?
Horses really live in their body, for starters. Actually, a point that can tie over from our very last episode is the fact that horses live in the moment. And so you're constantly thinking about, the way that you feel in your body and in the space that you're in. And it's such a constant feedback. So you're always having to be not at the mercy, but just like you're in the feedback system constantly, which we'll go into further in the episode. But it's just the body, your brain, the environment, and how they tie together. And of course, the horse is just so in their body that they're really in tune with how they feel all the time.
Yeah, and then there's quite a subconscious aspect to that. You know, they don't have to think about, I'm going to walk over this rough piece of ground and I need to adjust how I'm going to use my muscles here. Like their muscles will just adapt and adjust to that. And the same with, you know, their gait and their ability to move. You know, if they've got really good proprioception, they're going to push from the right point. They're going to lift that limb high enough, you know, to get over, if it's a pole, if it's something else laying on the ground, they're not going to knock it. And that's going to make them feel, you know, safe, adaptable, and then they're just going to be able to regulate their emotions so much better because they're not constantly having to think about, oh, there's something there, I have to pick my leg up a bit more. Oh, but now I've got to watch that scary thing in the distance, but I can't control my legs because last time, you know, I tripped a little bit and now there's something else over there. And then there's this person telling me something else I have to do. And, you know, if they're feeling safe and adaptable in their body, then they're able to, you know, take all of that in and respond appropriately to that because they're not having to consciously think about their body. It's just doing what it needs to do, which is such an important, you know, it gives them a lot of power in that position over their body.
When you mention the term subconscious, an example that you see often, I know you've seen this at clinics, and I see it sometimes after a bodywork session when you're encouraging a horse to think about, you know, moving over an obstacle and doing it quite slowly with controlled, you know, intentional movement. And sometimes you, to get them to put their front legs over, you'll wait there a moment, you know, give them a scratch or something, and then you say, okay, I want you to give me a slow step with your hind foot coming over, and you'll see them go, you know, a little bit head up and their eyes wide and like, oh, I've been here for a while and my autopilot is not going to help me to get over the pole because now I have to think about where my feet are and I don't normally do that. And so your limb position and their use, both standing when you're in motion, has to be appropriate, you know, to the environment that you're in. And so,
Situation.
yeah, you can have lots of different issues. One, even just in your ability to push from the correct position. You know, you might always assemble yourself in a certain way, and if you find yourself in a spot where you're in an unusual spot, it can really make you feel unsafe in your own body, and that relates to your emotional regulation as well.
Yeah, especially if you can't easily get yourself out. So, you know, horses that I've worked with really good proprioception, where they have that really great awareness and perception of their body and what's happening around them. Like if you do stop them over the pole or in a difficult situation, they don't have to think that much to get themselves out. Like they can slowly and controlled step themselves out. They know how high to step, how far to step. It doesn't look uncontrolled at all. Like they don't take a step that's too high. They don't take a step that's too long or too short, or that they step on the pole. You know, they just step out of that situation, whether it's over a pole or some, you know, say even being caught up in a fence or something. Like they just step out of the situation with the appropriate movement through their body. And that's why we do the one pole thing at clinics and things, because what I see with one pole is a horse's true proprioception. Like it shows me their ability to move their legs, you know, whether it's requiring conscious input when you slow it down, or whether it's automated and they have appropriate responses. And you'll see some horses get really stressed, or they'll just shut down and, you know, almost not be able to move, just through stepping and slowing down over one pole, stopping the front legs before the back legs. I've had horses where they'd actually fully stepped over the pole and then I stopped them, but they thought their back legs were still on the other side of the pole. So then when I asked them to move off, they stepped as though they stepped over the pole, but they'd already stepped over the pole. So that for me is a lack of proprioception. Or if they have to like look at the obstacle and actually visually figure it out, that's also a lack of proprioception.
Absolutely. And all of those things add, are so important for the horse, but because we're standing right next to them and we use them for sport and movement, recreation, etc., it's very important for us and our safety as well, because where the horse places their feet is often very close to ours, trying not to get stood on or bumped or, knocked in certain positions. And their awareness of us also ties into their awareness of themselves and where we are in relation to each other. So, it's a massive safety issue for us as well, and also when you get into sport, you want your horse to read the height of a jump, the distance to a jump, and small things like when you're on them and you're in precarious situations, like people who do, trail riding and being in extreme situations on the side of a mountain, you're really relying on your horse's ability to place their feet well, to balance them, and to time the way that they use their limbs for both of you.
Yeah, when you were in Peru, did you have any experience with horses over there?
Did. We were hiking I'd ridden a horse for a day when I was unwell, and it just blew me away how incredibly quiet and precise all of their steps were.
Quiet. That's interesting, isn't it?
Very quiet and just and so soft everywhere, and a very confident way of navigating through the rocks and around terrain, and also their ability to make evaluations. So being presented with almost a little space where you have to pick and choose, and looking like, I've evaluated what's in front of me, and now I can and come through it so well, so precise and so balanced. And of course, adapting to having somebody on their back as well. It's a skill. And also being up there on foot and seeing horses travel past you with really big pack saddles on them. They're quite small horses with a really big load, and they're traveling along the edge of a cliff down into a ravine, along a very rocky path, and they're just like, dun, 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 dun,
So
like
easy.
very easy, very confident. And that in itself, you can see just how emotionally regulated they are. They pull up and they're like, oh, I can easily rest here for a second, and then I can step off and just be so confident in my ability that I'm not going to fall off the
And I'm
edge.
gonna be fine. I can get through this easily. I know my legs.
Yeah, and it's the combination of experience and really, really knowing where you're putting your feet and how you
Yeah.
balance to what's on your back.
Yeah, I mean, well, a horse with good proprioception, has good balance within themselves, and then that ability to counterbalance other things that are placed on them. Like I know, just working with horses with good and bad proprioception or good and altered proprioception, like I was treating a 3-year-old gangly warm blood, very tall, like he was already 17 hands, I think, or up near about that. And I was dodging my feet, moving my feet all the time because he did not know. So when a horse knows where they're going to put their feet, I generally know where they're going to put their feet. When a horse doesn't know where they're going to put their feet, I don't know where they're going to put their feet because they don't know. And he stood on me because he just, his foot went out to the side and he didn't even know he was on my foot. Or if he did, he didn't have the ability subconsciously, like he had to kind of then think, oh crap, I need to move my foot, rather than just going, oh, that's different, and just quickly moving it without thinking. And like, so he stood on my foot for, a good, I don't know, felt like, a good 10 seconds or something. I had to physically push him off because he just didn't have an awareness. And that is so dangerous for us, horses that don't know where their feet are, because, we're constantly having to be on alert. They're feeling like they're out of balance. And yeah, and they can bump us, they can, step on us, they can all, it's just so, like, the safety aspect of them having good proprioception is just so important, let alone in, performance and, like you said, jumping and being able to respond that way. So yeah, it's so important to us as well. And riding a horse, working with a horse that has good proprioception, it's so weird because they can respond to something, and say there's a horse that responds to something and they swing around, swing their body around, but they know exactly where, like a horse with good proprioception, they might swing around, but they know exactly where you are, and they know, how far they can go before they hit you. And I've had a horse, that scared itself, stood on a piece of tin, leapt forward, and in that moment I was right in front of the horse and I thought, I'm stuffed here. He was able, now he did stand on himself, and that was his lack of proprioception, but in that moment he was able to, he twisted and contorted his body, so he just bumped me slightly and stood on himself to make sure that he didn't hit me. Now there's training in that, and he did hit himself, but and if he had have had really good proprioception, he wouldn't have even hit himself. So that's training and proprioception, but it saved me from probably potentially getting stood on and kicked in that moment. So yeah, so important.
So valuable. I actually had an experience only 3 days ago with this young thoroughbred, a 5-year-old, and he also stood on my foot. Funny that you should say that. And he was in a very split posture in the moment. And I noticed as he had stood on my toe, he had actually rocked really far to one leg, but then didn't really know how to lift the one that he had on me off. And I had to push him off balance to be like, thankfully we could do a bit slow because it wasn't really heavily on my foot, but he was kind of doing this oscillation movement between his legs, almost like, how do
How
I?
do I figure this out?
And he is, I just did a work trip, but out of nearly 50 horses that I saw, he was the most stressed of them all. And he would stand there, but he was having a lot of very busy behaviors, and we had to take a lot of breaks because he was stressed in his environment. As soon as we went to, can you please think about your body, it was overwhelming.
Like, I don't have any ability to do that. Yeah. And
And
it's
some time. Yeah.
yeah, it's so scary for them. So you really understand it. And so we've talked about, some of our experiences with horses with good and bad proprioception, but if we think about, from a physiological perspective, like there's a number of influencing factors. Like the horses have what we call proprioceptors, and they are, some of them are superficial, some of them are in the skin, some of them are towards the outside of the body. We have deeper ones that are like within the muscles. And there's different names for these receptors, such as the Pancinian corpuscles, the Ruffini corpuscles, and they're feeling and sensing vibrations, pressures, and distortions of the tissue. And then there's other aspects like free nerve endings. There's pain receptors, which are called nociceptors, heat receptors, thermoreceptors, light photoreceptors, movement receptors, mechanoreceptors, and then within the muscles themselves, they have these Golgi tendon organs and muscle spindles that also are giving feedback about muscle position, and also receiving information from the brain about where the muscle position should be. So those are like the important receptors. Where would we find kind of areas where there's a lot of receptors in the body, and why, I guess?
So largely the hoof is a space where you're going to find a huge amount of receptors, particularly because that's the horse's fingertips. They're inferring, as well as, the face, but the feet receive information from the ground about the balance of the foot. as well as the surface that they're on. That's where you find a huge amount of those Pacinian corpuscles. They take on vibration predominantly. The horse, it tells the horse how hard the surface is that they're working on. And the horse, that's afferent input, and it travels, to the nervous system of the horse, and then they give a response by engaging muscles of their, even their flexor tendons for soft surfaces, and the lengthening and the contracting of those muscles that are attached to the flexor tendons of the legs are places where there's a huge amount of receptors, because the horse knows then how much lengthening and contracting is happening in those spaces and what kind of surface they're on and how to compensate for those.
Stabilize.
Yeah, and to stabilize, as well as the horse also has a huge amount of receptors around its face. You've got your whiskers, you've got your sense of smell, your olfactory system, your vision, and also in your mouth, in your jaw, the amount of receptors that they get. They lick and chew and use their teeth to test things, and that's another area that they're constantly taking in information about. What else can you think of?
Yeah, the fascial system, which is the spider web-like layer that covers all of the muscles, all the organs, all the nerves, all the bones, and it's a continuous layer through the body. So I think we're learning more and more about the importance of that in relaying information, and how quickly information can travel through fascia. So I think that's probably more important than we even realize. And then I think you said it, but like around the joints, and so that they can really recognize where the joint is in space, and how much to move it, and how much to support it, like what you were saying with the muscle tension. How much support does that joint need not to go through an excessive range of motion? And though the systems of smell and vision and all of that, like they're complementing those receptors. And if a horse has exceptional proprioception, you can take away vision and they will still be able to feel their way in the environment. So sometimes it's a test, that we do to see the function of their neurological system, which tests proprioception, is to put a blindfold on. Don't recommend anyone does it unsupervised, but and seeing, do they still know where their legs are in that situation? So if, and an example of that, sorry, is Patch. So when I used to walk her over poles, she would always want to put her head down and look at the poles, and then she'd organize her feet. If I held her head up and blocked her vision, her front legs she could do, but the back legs she would stop or rush or get anxious, because she'd had string halt. And so she just didn't have the same control of her back legs as what, as a normal horse. And I could see how distressing that became for her. So as she got better control, she got a lot less stressed about stepping over things with those back legs. So that was a really, interesting example there. And just one more system is the vestibular system. So it's basically like the inner ear. It's a balance system within the inner ear. And it kind of sends feedback to the body about, where it is in relation to the horizon, is probably the easiest way to describe it. And so that's really important for their balance. And so if the balance system is off, it's going to influence the proprioception, because, they don't really know, am I upright right now or am I not upright right now? So that can be really valuable for them too. When we talk about like horses with poor proprioception, so we've mentioned a couple, like stepping on our feet, struggling with back legs over poles, struggling with a pole. What other things have you seen with horses that are lacking, proprioception?
Often horses that struggle to sort of right themselves when they're in a funny posture. So, um, there are more complex tests that can be done for neurological issues, where you, with limb placement things and seeing how quickly they move. But also, like we were talking about that horse before, he'd found himself stuck in a position where, he's sort of like throwing his head about, and then he's like, oh, the position that I'm in isn't really supporting me, but I actually don't know how I'm supposed to coordinate myself to get back to a more stable position. And you see that sometimes in horses, maybe in floats also. That's a position where horses have to be very good at balancing against, the trailer moving, and it's hard for them to predict because sometimes they can't always see which direction they're going to go as well, or when you're about to brake or take off. So, horses that really struggle in the float is another instance where, delayed responses are something that decreases your safety and your sense of safety as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, obviously that stability can be influenced by musculoskeletal restrictions as well as proprioception. The other thing, when horses start to trip or stumble, so they're not navigating the surfaces very well, or you walk them over the pole or the object and they knock it. Or the other aspect of that is they just knock themselves, like you ask them to turn a smaller circle, or you ask them to do a bit of an uncontrolled movement, and they get their legs. It's like what you're talking about, except your horse was stationary, couldn't figure out the legs, but the same can happen in motion where they're like, my leg, I don't know how to move my leg away from the other leg. And I was doing an exercise with Jelly this morning, and I was walking him over, like I have a bridge, but I was walking him over the short part of the bridge. So rather than going along the bridge, like just going over the narrow part of the bridge. And he just doesn't know how to step with it. So he's like, maybe if I take like a big step, then I can just step both my back legs over. And look, it's probably also lumbosacral restrictions, and I know he's got rib restrictions, so the act of actually stepping up and down is physically hard for him. But then when he can't control his legs, again, it comes back to that ability, like that connection between emotional regulation, balance, postural stability, and proprioception. Like then he gets like, and he gets way less anxious now because he tries to listen and respond, and I try to help him. But that's an example where he's like, I don't know how to get my legs coordinated in this situation. And so I'll just do a big step. And another thing I've seen too is when you put them on a hill, specifically a downhill, and you'll see this little hover. So instead of the foot just coming down and like interacting with the ground, it's like it thinks it lands before it lands. And so it looks like there's a little hover in the leg. And so that whenever I see that, I'm like, the horse doesn't seem to have good proprioception, and then I'll might test it with some other tests.
That's very interesting. And what you were just saying then about like, I'm not exactly sure where my foot was as it's, traveling down, you might tying in with the idea of horses knocking into poles. That's obviously space that you see it, but your horse might present to you and you might say, oh, my horse is just clumsy, because they always come in with little knocks on their legs and scratches and bits and pieces where they've bumped into things. But horses don't inherently not care about bumping into things actually, and when they can be, they're very careful about where they feet. So that's just another thing you can look for as a sign of, oh, maybe my horse's proprioception isn't functioning quite as well as it could be.
Yeah, and the other aspect which we haven't mentioned is rushing. So like if another way to compensate for poor limb awareness, proprioception, and balance is if you go quicker, you don't have to control everything as much. And so, like, often at the start of a clinic, I'll just say to people, just go walk over the poles, just see. And some horses, they do them fine, like they don't knock them or anything. Then we slow them down, and then all of a sudden they're like, they were just in autopilot and they were just using speed to propel their legs forward, as opposed to having that subconscious awareness. So then when you change the environment a little bit, all of a sudden they're like, huh? And they can't adapt. And so that inability to adapt highlights, where some of those weaknesses are as well. So then if we're thinking about, well, like, people are probably wondering, oh, my horse is maybe showing a couple of these signs, or, what can I do to improve my horse's proprioception, which I think every horse should do some proprioception exercises in their training schedule, regardless of age, discipline, experience, performance, all the things. What kind of exercises have you found to be beneficial to help horses with their proprioception?
So it's really about the mindful awareness of how you move. So you were talking about the subconscious aspect of proprioception earlier, and that's for when you have a developed, a system of proprioception, you don't actively think about it, but in order to make a change, you have to become aware of yourself and then grow consciously, and then that conscious awareness can become unconscious or subconscious again. But you have to practice consistently that conscious awareness of where I am in relation to myself and my environment. So it's a real brain body mindful connection to open that space. And of course, we'll do an episode on young horse development as well. But of course, all prevention and starting before you have issues is always fantastic as well. So how, improving your horse's proprioception, that might be having relationships with your horse early on where you're encouraging them to think about those aspects of, slow and controlled motion to create good neural pathways. So for example, that might be foals, when they're young, giving them different surfaces, areas to move, things to step over, and also encouraging them to think about the way that they move as we start handling them. What else?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Like, working with the young, like even working with foals, and really developing those neural pathways as a young horse. I mean, some foals will just naturally have great limb awareness, but yeah, like with Ellie, when I got her, she was struggling with her proprioception because she had a few injuries, and I did a lot of, so one of the things that you can do is setting up a pole. I generally start with one pole because you want to see how they cope with that, if they can go real slow over it, if you can stop them at different points and there's not anxiety and they can stay relaxed and calm with it. And then once I know they can handle the one pole, I'll add a challenge. So I might add 2 poles just on a triangle, and then you can get really complex with it, and you can build up to having a number of poles in a haphazard arrangement. And a really good horse with great proprioception will slow themselves down. They'll pick up their legs. They'll figure out a way to move through it without making a complete mess of it and getting really anxious and worried. Like, they'll just pick their way through. So then you can use things like tires. You can have, like you said, different obstacles in different positions that they have to move through. You can use like T-touch wraps, which are really great to bring awareness to the body if your horse is struggling. And I highly recommend that people, do some study in the use of those or get to a clinic with them. They're amazing. in helping with proprioception, and they're a wrap that we put on their body, like often, you know, around the front and the hind end, and bring connection to their body, or around their head. So they're really beneficial. Surefoot pads, like you've utilized surefoot pads, which are, you know, we get the horses to stand on it. It's giving them they have different foam densities, and you can just get cheap mats from like Big W, different densities of exercise mats. I've got some garden kneeling pads from Bunnings that were $3, you know, different densities and thicknesses. And the Equiband is another one that you can put on their hind end. That's an amazing system for strength and stability and proprioception. What else?
I was just thinking, when we're talking about improving your horse's proprioception, obviously hoof care is something that you can't ignore in the whole system of, you know, influencing those receptors. And with the density of those receptors that take on vibration in the hoof, those Pacinian corpuscles, it's worth noting that keeping your horse's hooves, you know, healthy with good circulation, a lack of thrush, you know, making sure that they're clean, well tended to, and also awareness of the fact that, you know, possibly the use of shoes can change or influence the way that your horse interprets the ground, including the fact that vibration can increase through the hoof when you're using metal.
Different pressures.
Yep, and different pressures, and where you put the pressure as well. You know, that's peripheral hoof loading, and then there's also different systems of rubber shoes, and you know, the ones that you can glue on or nail on, as well as boots. And there's lots of different things to explore, and so you can be creative in, once you have an awareness of, you know, maybe the kind of issues your horse is challenged with, how you're going to come up against those to make an improvement. And you know, another one that can really help is variation, you know, and we've been just talking about surfaces, hills, poles, haphazard arrangements, but also novel times, like when you go out in the bush and the horse is in a space where you know, their sensory system is all being stimulated, you know, smells and sights, and thinking about textures and experience, because novelty can be very good for horses to engage with their environment, and also for fun, because things should be fun, and there's enough research that suggests that we learn well when we're in play and engaging with our environment as well.
Yeah, I think that variation is so important. And we mentioned like the development of new neural pathways, and earlier, like we talked a little bit like ourselves before we were recording, but we talked about Dr. Stephen Peters, who's an equine neuroscientist. And so if you want to learn more about kind of the brain, then go and find his podcast. But you know, he talks about the importance that when we're developing new neural pathways, that you've got to give a lot of time, and that they need a lot of rest. And so when you are developing and working on a horse's proprioception, especially if it's difficult for them, if they've just done something really mindfully, because it's so, like, I can again vouch for it from my own perspective. When I was rehabbing from my back, I was walking in the pool, and when I was walking in the pool, 5 minutes of conscious walking and controlling and stepping my foot, you know, heel to toe, and being aware of how it was contacting the bottom of the pool, I would get home. Now I'm just walking in the water for 5 minutes. I would get home and I was exhausted. Like I had to sleep for half an hour at least. And so what we're doing there is, and we need rest within the session, and then the rest after the session, is we're developing new neural pathways and new patterns of movement. And these need that time to develop. Otherwise, you lose a lot of benefit in what you're doing. And for some horses, you know, you slow them down, you do the exercise, they're fine, you know, they did it. There was not much thinking. You know, they were like, yeah, this is cool, I can do it. Other horses, yeah, it's like extremely fatiguing, and that rest is he talks about it. Dr. Stephen Peters talks about how important that is, and overnight rest as well, to allow all those programs to go in. And then you notice if you've done it right, you've given them the rest, you haven't pushed them, the next day will be better, and the next day will be better. It's crazy how quickly the improvements happen if we like give enough rest. So it's not about doing it 50 times, it's actually hugely quality over quantity. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And sometimes that it always comes back a little bit to patience and personal development and just being okay with where you are and where the horse is, because less is more, and you give time and take time to save time in the long term.
Yeah, especially if they're showing any anxiety, or you know their emotions are starting to go up, then they're showing you, this is difficult for me, I'm struggling with this. So then you need to take it back a notch. You might have to remove a pole. I've had to remove all the poles once, like it was just way too much for the horse. I've done that a couple of times where and they show they're trying, but it's not about pulling them over the pole. You are not allowed to pull them. They have to initiate their own motion. They have to control their own motion, and they have to find relaxation in that motion. So I think that's probably a good place to finish up with those thoughts. Yeah, and just remember, you know, proprioception is the key to your horse's safety, their performance, their longevity, and their emotional regulation. So incorporating the mindful exercises in your horse's regime to promote limb and body awareness, such as slow and controlled movement, and you really can't go too slow, over poles or over different obstacles or different terrains, is absolutely invaluable and integral to any training program. So that includes horses that are not ridden. So yeah, thanks for listening to today's episode on proprioception. I hope that you've enjoyed it and gained a lot from that.
Absolutely. Proprioception is powerful for the horse. See you next week, everyone.
Thank you.